Good evening and welcome back to AdCast. I'm Carl Vervisch. I'm the Vice President of Ad2 Tampa Bay, and I'm here with my co-host and President, Kate Whatley.
Hi. Tonight we're talking to Glen Peak, the President of PeakBiety Branding and Advertising, about the Amendment 5 issue because he was on the Southern Council Committee of the American Association of Advertising Agencies
right?
back in the 80s when the service tax first
Way back.
came up.
Now that was back in 86, 87.
86, yes.
So tell us about what happened.
Well, here we are 22 years later, not learning, about to, at least preparing or proposing that we make the same mistake again. But my memory of this is just, as an ad guy, it really breaks into two parts, I think. I think the fallacies in the thinking, and then the what I would call the ensuing madness or chaos. In terms of the fallacies, the first one was, we're going to put 5% on advertising, and everybody will just raise their budgets accordingly, and this will all be covered, everything will be wonderful.
As if we're not squeezing advertising.
Because everyone's always willing to pay more money for advertising. Any of us can attest to that.
And we were in growth, and so that there was, I think, a huge fallacy in that thinking. I think that existed in the legislature to a great degree at that time. And yet the opposite happened, really. We had significant revenue losses. We had border wars where dollars that were going to be spent in Pensacola went to Mobile. Dollars that were going to be spent in Jacksonville went to Georgia. You had companies national companies that had spot television schedules, not network, but spot television schedules, that just elected to black out Florida or spend it in other states, redirect the money.
Yeah, we heard from Jack Hebert that actually spots ran blank.
Yeah. And in fact, the 4As, at one point in '87, after we were into the thing, and I went back and looked at my notes to try to verify this, but there was a study they ran for 1 quarter and compared it to the like quarter of a year ago in terms of the spot TV spending in the state of Florida. It was down 12%. Well, it had never been down 12%. So I mean, you have revenue loss, so you're driving your base down. The other fallacy was, this one I always loved, was they were somehow going to figure out how to tax the national messages coming in. So you buy a national network spot, and let's say it's $100,000 for convenience of conversation, and somebody decides that, well, the viewership in Florida is worth about 10%, so there's $10,000, so we'll whack a 5% tax on that, we'll have $500, and we will somehow collect this, somehow, which I'm not sure ever was made clear.
Right.
So you had all of that. And then, in terms of what I call the madness that ensued, in no order of importance, you had to grow the bureaucracy to manage this.
Sure.
And I look back at my notes from the 4As, and I think at that time they were projecting like $15 million a year just to gear up to manage this and control it and audit, okay? And that was supposed to hire something like 400 or 500 auditors.
This is the state?
And by the time it was repealed, which by the way was like, 6 months,
So it had a lot of longevity. Obviously, it was working out well.
Yeah, really, a lot of longevity. But they had hired like 160 auditors, not 400 or 500. So, there was a certain amount of, and you're going to grow the bureaucracy to do that. So I mentioned the border wars earlier. Mm-hmm. There was really significant, Mobile, Pensacola, and Jacksonville in Georgia, I remember in particular. All of the political maneuvering, some of which I think I would call nasty. I don't know if that's the right word, but at any rate, there were certain things that were going to be exempted, as I recall from my 4A's notes, religious, charitable, veteran things, etc. But there were other things that were going to be exempted, whereas advertising was going to get taxed, but barbers, beauticians, travel agents, were going to get exempted. Well, why
wow.
was that? Well, there were lots of little stories about whose wife was a travel agent and that. Anyhow, there was all that nasty stuff. I do think that it was discriminatory to a lot of small, particularly small radio stations that depended pretty heavily on local dollars, and they didn't have any national spots coming at them, etc. So that it hurt them badly. And I think then the other thing that I always remember is just the sheer anger. You had, I don't know how many lawsuits about just the advertising part filed by the time this was repealed. You had television stations running spots opposing this thing.
Oh,
So I
I'm
mean,
sure.
Sure.
almost unheard of. So it was it was pretty wild.
Now, as the owner of an agency at the time, can you talk a little bit about how it changed the inner works of an advertising agency? What you guys had to do?
Well, it really hurt us. Interestingly enough, in our case, maybe it was the nature of our client mix or something. It didn't really result in a lot of loss of business, but it resulted in a real escalation of our costs. I think there was some loss of business, but I can't quantify it because what we had was clients saying, "Well, what is this? I mean, you're taxing me for this ideation. You created a storyboard and a copy sheet, and now you're telling me that you're going to have to tax that, and we haven't even produced it yet.
Sure.
So you're going to tax me when I go to produce it as well." So that was that whole definition of what is tangible property. Well, at that time, they were saying tangible property, storyboard, copy sheet, tangible property, the time you spent doing that is taxable.
Wow.
Okay? And if you didn't tax it, you ran the risk of being audited. And there was some point of view that maybe agencies were being targeted because one of the major lawsuits against this was brought by an agency. And there were, I know of at least 2 instances where they were audited and there were penalties for back taxes. So, and if you're not well funded, if you're underfunded, that could mean life or death. So there were some people that had severe problems. We had some business that I know went out of state. I know that there were some people that elected to do things in Atlanta and then ship it in. Okay, well, who's watching that? Is that being
Yeah,
taxed?
that's another gray
And
area.
how are you going to get to that? Okay, and then there was also, as I recall, an exemption for in-house groups. So if you're a company, you have an in-house agency, and you call it an in-house agency, and you label it that. Maybe you even have a name for it, but you're exempt. So
Wow.
guess what? The people sitting outside, the outsourcing business goes like this.
Sure.
And that holds it. So we did have an escalation of costs, and I can't really quantify loss of business. I think there was some, but I don't know how much.
Now, having a bit of an idea of what's going on right now, and obviously back then, how similar is this Amendment 5 to what you faced back in '87?
Well, I think it's the prospect of what it could be. I mean, if you have to make up this shortfall, you're going to reach, and I think there's at least an expectation that they're going to reach for services such as advertising.
And we could be facing all the same things you just talked about.
I think so. I think you'll have essentially the same chaos. You'll probably have even greater bureaucracy issues and the management of this. I think if we have, remember other states before we enacted the services tax had enacted one and repealed it.
And then we did
Before we even tried it 22 years ago.
Wow.
Yes. Well, thank you so much, Glenn, for coming.
Thanks for
on
joining
show.
us on
the
You've
show.
been a great guest.
Nice talking to you.
Very informative. Thanks
Okay.
so much. And thanks to our sponsors, TBT, Tampa Digital Studios, and Spark for hosting us tonight.
And thanks once again to all you at home for watching. It's been another great episode of AdCast, and I invite you to, until we see you again, make good choices.